The crisp October morning air carried the scent of autumn leaves as Sergeant James Mitchell straightened his red tunic for the final time before assuming his post. At 34, James had dedicated 12 years of his life to serving as one of the Queen's Guards, standing sentinel at some of Britain's most prestigious locations. Today he would take his position outside the main entrance of Windsor Castle, where tourists from around the world came to witness the pageantry and tradition of the royal household. James had always taken pride in his role. The red tunic, the towering black bearskin hat, the polished boots, and the ceremonial rifle were not just uniform pieces, they were symbols of centuries of British military tradition. Every morning he would dress with meticulous care, ensuring every button gleamed and every crease was razor sharp. His colleagues often joked that James could win uniform inspections even on his worst days, but today felt different as he walked toward his post. The castle staff had mentioned that a special group would be visiting 20 individuals from the Sunshine Special Needs Center, accompanied by their families and caregivers. James had encountered many tour groups over the years, school children who giggled and tried to make him smile, tourists who posed for photos while attempting to get a reaction, and dignitaries who observed the guards with respectful distance. This group, however, would be unlike any other he had encountered. As James took his position beside the massive stone archway, he could already hear voices approaching in the distance. There was something different about these voices. They carried an unmistakable tone of genuine excitement and wonder that seemed to cut through the usual tourist chatter. James positioned himself according to the strict protocols he had memorized years ago. Feet shoulder-width apart, rifle held at the precise angle. Eyes staring straight ahead into the middle distance, facial expression completely neutral. The Queen's Guard manual was clear. Guards must remain motionless and expressionless, regardless of external distractions. They were living statues, symbols of unwavering duty and discipline. As the group rounded the corner, James caught his first glimpse of them through his peripheral vision. Leading the way was Mrs. Patricia Thompson, the center's director. A woman in her 50s with graying hair and kind eyes that seemed to sparkle with the same excitement as her charges. Behind her walked and rolled a diverse group of individuals, each facing their own unique challenges, but united in their shared anticipation for this special day. There was Tommy, a 10-year-old boy with Down syndrome, practically bouncing with each step as he pointed at everything around him. His bright blue eyes were wide with wonder, and he clutched a small toy soldier in his hand, a miniature version of the very guards he was about to meet. Tommy had been talking about this visit for weeks, practicing his salutes and marching. Around his bedroom, while wearing a paper hat he had crafted himself, beside Tommy walked his mother, Jennifer, a single parent who worked 2 jobs to provide for her son. She had saved for months to afford this trip, wanting to give Tommy an experience he would never forget. Her eyes were already moist with emotion as she watched her son's pure joy at finally seeing his. Heroes in person, rolling alongside the group, was Sarah, a 17-year-old with spina bifida, who navigated the world from her wheelchair with grace and determination. Sarah had always been fascinated by horses. She had studied everything she could about the Queen's horses before this visit. Her caregiver, Miss Claire, pushed her wheelchair while Sarah excitedly pointed out architectural details she had read about in preparation for the trip. The group also included Marcus, a 25-year-old man with autism who had an encyclopedic knowledge of British military history. He could recite the formation dates of various regiments and explain the significance of different uniform elements. Despite his social challenges, Marcus felt completely at ease discussing his passion for military tradition. There was also elderly Mr. Robert Chin, who had suffered a stroke 2 years earlier and now struggled with speech and mobility. His daughter Lisa had brought him on this trip hoping to rekindle some of the joy he had lost since his health declined. Mr. Chen had served briefly in the military during his youth and had always held deep respect for ceremonial guards. Among the group were several other individuals. Emma, a young woman with intellectual disabilities who loved photography and had brought a disposable camera to document every moment. David, a teenage boy with cerebral palsy who communicated through a tablet device and had prepared dozens of questions about guard duties. And Maria, a middle-aged woman with developmental disabilities who had brought homemade cookies for everyone, including, she hoped, the guards themselves. As they approached James's position, the tour guide, Rebecca, began her well-rehearsed speech about the history of the Queen's Guard. She explained how the guards had protected British royalty for centuries, how their distinctive uniforms had evolved over time, and how the guards maintained their posts through all weather conditions and distractions. The guards you see before you, Rebecca explained, are highly trained soldiers who take their duty very seriously. They remain completely still during their watch, focusing entirely on their protective responsibilities. While they cannot speak or interact during their duty hours, they represent the very best of British military tradition. Tommy listened intently, but his attention kept drifting to James himself. The boy studied every detail of the guard's appearance. Way the morning light reflected off the brass buttons, how perfectly still James remained, the impressive height of the bearskin hat. Tommy had never seen anyone stand so perfectly straight and motionless, and he was filled with admiration for what he perceived as superhuman discipline and strength. Sarah, meanwhile, had spotted the horses in the adjacent courtyard and was already planning how she might get a closer look. The beautiful animals stood with the same dignified stillness as their human counterparts. Sarah felt her heart race with the possibility of meeting them. As the group gathered around James's position for photos and explanations, none of them could have predicted that this ordinary Tuesday morning would become a day that would change all of their lives forever. The stage was set for something extraordinary, a moment when rigid protocol would give way to human compassion, creating memories that would last a lifetime and inspire countless others around the world. As the tour guide continued her explanation, James found himself fighting an internal battle between duty and humanity. Through his peripheral vision, he could see Tommy inching closer, the boy's fascination evident in every movement. Tommy's toy soldier was clutched tightly in his small hands, and James could hear him whispering to his mother about how tall and brave the real guards looked. "Mummy, do you think he's scared standing so still?" Tommy asked in his characteristic speech. Pattern, his voice carrying the innocent curiosity that only children possess. "I tried standing like that at home, but I got wiggly after 2 minutes." Jennifer smiled and gently explained that the guards were very brave and specially trained to stand perfectly still. She had researched everything about the Queen's Guards before this trip, wanting to answer Tommy's endless questions accurately. "They're protecting very important people, sweetheart, just like the toy soldiers you play with, but these are real heroes." The comparison to his beloved toy soldiers made Tommy's eyes grow even wider. He looked back and forth between his miniature figure and James, marveling at the similarities in their uniforms. The red tunic, the black hat, even the serious expression, it was like his toys had come to life. Meanwhile, Cicero had managed to convince Miss Claire to wheel her closer to the area where the horses were stationed. Corporal Emma Rodriguez stood beside Wellington, a magnificent black gelding who had served in ceremonial duties for 8 years. Wellington was known among the guards for his gentle temperament and almost supernatural ability to sense people's emotions. Sarah had done extensive research about the Queen's horses before her visit. She knew that Wellington was a Shire horse, bred specifically for ceremonial purposes, and that he had participated in numerous state occasions. What she hadn't expected was how incredibly beautiful and imposing he would be in person. The horse stood 17 hands high, his coat gleaming in the morning sunlight, his mane perfectly braided according to military standards. "He's absolutely magnificent," Sarah whispered to Miss Claire, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "I've read about him in books, but seeing him in real life is like meeting a celebrity." Emma Rodriguez heard Sarah's comment and felt something stir within her. As a female guard, Emma had faced her own challenges breaking into the traditionally male-dominated ceremonial units. She understood what it felt like to be different, to have to work twice as hard to prove yourself worthy of respect and inclusion. Looking at Sarah's face, filled with such genuine appreciation and wonder, Emma began to question whether strict adherence to protocol was always the most honorable course of action. Back near the main entrance, Marcus had positioned himself at the perfect angle to observe multiple guards simultaneously. His encyclopedic knowledge of military history was in full display as he quietly shared facts with anyone who would listen. He knew the exact thread count of the guards' tunics, the weight of their rifles, and the specific ceremonial significance of every element of their dress. The bearskin hats are made from Canadian black bear fur, Marcus explained to David, who was furiously typing notes on his communication tablet. They're 18 inches tall and weigh about 1.5 pounds. The guards have been wearing them since 1815, after the Battle of Waterloo. David found Marcus's knowledge fascinating and began asking questions through his tablet. The two young men, despite their different communication styles, formed an instant connection over their shared interest in military tradition and ceremony. Mr. Chen, supported by his daughter Lisa, stood quietly observing everything around him. Since his stroke, he had struggled with depression and often felt disconnected from the world around him. But something about being here, watching these young soldiers maintain their disciplined watch, stirred memories of his own brief military service decades earlier. He remembered the pride he had felt wearing a uniform, the sense of purpose that came with serving something greater than himself. Emma, still holding her camera, was documenting everything she could. Each photo captured not just the visual spectacle of the guards and horses, but the pure emotions on her friends' faces. She had never seen Tommy so focused and admired, or Sarah so genuinely moved by beauty. Through her viewfinder, she was witnessing something special happening, connections being formed between her companions and these dedicated soldiers. Maria, ever the caregiver, had been observing how hard the guards worked and how long they had been standing in the same positions. Her nurturing instincts kicked in as she worried about their comfort and well-being. She had brought her homemade cookies specifically hoping to share them, though she wasn't sure how to offer them to guards who couldn't break their stoic poses. Mrs. Thompson watched all of this unfold with growing emotion. As the director of Sunshine's Special Needs Center, she had organized hundreds of outings over the years, but she had never seen her clients respond to anything quite like this. The guards represented something powerful to them: strength, dedication, service, and honor. These were qualities that society often assumed people with disabilities couldn't fully appreciate or aspire to. But Mrs. Thompson was witnessing the opposite. The tour guide, Rebecca, continued her scripted presentation. But she too was beginning to notice the unique dynamics of this particular group. Unlike typical tourists who often treated the guards as living statues or photo opportunities, these visitors observed them with genuine respect and admiration. There was no attempt to make the guards break character for entertainment. Instead, there was a palpable appreciation for their service and sacrifice. As the morning progressed, an unspoken tension began to build. The guards, trained to ignore all distractions, found themselves increasingly aware of the group's sincere appreciation. The visitors, accustomed to often being overlooked or patronized in public spaces, were experiencing something entirely different. They were in the presence of individuals who commanded respect through their dedication and service. Neither side fully understood it yet, but they were on the verge of a moment that would challenge everything they thought they knew about duty, protocol, and human connection. The stage was perfectly set for an extraordinary display of compassion that would ripple far beyond the castle walls. The moment that would change everything began with the smallest gesture imaginable. Tommy, who had been standing as close to James as his mother would allow, suddenly dropped his toy soldier. The small plastic figure clattered against the cobblestones and rolled directly toward James's polished boots. Tommy looked up at his mother with panic in his eyes. "Mummy, my soldier. He's right by the guard's feet." Jennifer quickly assessed the situation. The toy had rolled into the guard's immediate area, technically off limits to tourists. She began to apologize and started to retrieve the toy herself. But Tommy's distress was evident. The boy had carried that particular toy soldier everywhere for the past 3 years. It was his comfort object. His connection to the brave soldiers he admired so much. James watched this unfold through his peripheral vision, his training warring with his natural instincts. According to protocol, he should ignore the situation entirely, allowing the civilians to handle it themselves. Tourists dropped things near the guards regularly, and the standard procedure was to maintain position and let others deal with any disruptions. But something about Tommy's genuine distress touched James deeply. This wasn't a tourist trying to create a viral video or test the guard's resolve. This was a child who clearly loved and respected what the guards represented, and he was truly upset about potentially losing his treasured toy. The other members of the group had noticed the situation too. Zacchaeus immediately began explaining to David through gestures that the toy soldier was probably very important to Tommy. Drawing from his understanding of how people with disabilities often formed strong attachments to particular objects, Sarah had turned her wheelchair to get a better view. Her heart going out to the younger boy she had befriended during the bus ride to the castle, Mrs. Thompson approached carefully, not wanting to cause any disruption to the guard's duties. She had organized this trip with military precision herself, searching all the rules and protocols to ensure her group would be respectful visitors. The last thing she wanted was for any of her clients to inadvertently cause problems or embarrassment. "I'm terribly sorry," she said quietly, addressing James, although she knew he couldn't respond. "We'll retrieve the toy immediately and move along." But as Mrs. Thompson bent down to pick up the toy soldier, something unprecedented happened. James, maintaining his forward gaze and stoic expression, shifted his weight almost imperceptibly and used the toe of his boot to gently nudge the toy soldier back toward Tommy. The gesture was so subtle that most observers might have missed it entirely, but Tommy saw it clearly. His face transformed from distress to absolute wonder as he realized that the tall, imposing guard had actually helped him. The boy's mouth formed a perfect O of amazement as he carefully picked up his toy soldier and clutched it to his chest. "Mummy, did you see? The guard helped me. He moved his foot to give me back my soldier." Tommy's excitement was barely contained as he whispered urgently to his mother. Jennifer felt tears spring to her eyes as she witnessed this small act of kindness. She had spent years advocating for Tommy, fighting to ensure he was included and treated with dignity in various settings. Too often, people either ignored him entirely or spoke to him as if he were much younger than his 10 years. But this guard, bound by duty to remain silent and motionless, had found a way to acknowledge Tommy's distress and offer help. The incident didn't go unnoticed by James's fellow guards either. Corporal Davies, stationed 20 feet away, had observed the entire interaction. In his 8 years of service, he had never seen James break protocol in any way. The man was a stickler for rules and had often reminded younger guards about the importance of maintaining proper discipline. Yet here was James, risk his spotless record for a child he had never met. Davies found himself reconsidering his own stance as he watched Tommy's continued excitement. The boy kept looking back at James with pure admiration, occasionally giving small waves that he tried to keep hidden from the adults around him. Corporal Emma Rodriguez, still stationed with Wellington near the stables, observed the scene from a distance. She had heard about the special group's visit during the morning briefing and had wondered how the day might unfold. Emma had joined the ceremonial guard unit 3 years earlier, following a distinguished career in active military service. She understood the weight of responsibility that came with their role. But she also understood that true service meant putting people's well-being above rigid rule-following as Emma watched the interaction between James and Tommy. Wellington seemed to sense the emotional undercurrent of the moment. The massive horse turned his head slightly toward the group, his intelligent eyes taking in the scene. Wellington had been trained to remain perfectly still during ceremonies. But like his human counterparts, he possessed a natural sensitivity to the emotions of those around him. Sarah, still positioned in her wheelchair near the stable area, noticed Wellington's subtle movement immediately. Her extensive research about horses had taught her to read their body language, and she could see that Wellington was aware of their presence. The connection she felt with the magnificent animal was immediate and profound. "Miss Claire," Sarah whispered, "look how beautiful he is. Do you think he knows we're watching him?" Miss Claire, who had been Sarah's caregiver for 3 years, smiled at the girl's enthusiasm. She had never seen Sarah quite so animated about anything. The teenager usually maintained a reserved demeanor, partly due to her physical limitations, and partly due to the social isolation that often accompanied her disability. But here, surrounded by the majesty of the royal setting and the noble bearing of both guards and horses, Sarah seemed to blossom with confidence and joy. The tour guide, Rebecca, continued her presentation about the guards' training and responsibilities. But she was increasingly aware of the unique dynamic developing between the guards and this particular group of visitors. In her 5 years of conducting tours at Windsor Castle, she had never witnessed guards showing even the slightest acknowledgement of tourists. Yet here was clear evidence that these disciplined soldiers were not immune to the genuine appreciation and wonder of their special guests. Rebecca began to modify her usual script, emphasizing the human elements of the guard service rather than just the ceremonial aspects. These men and women, she explained, are not just ceremonial figures. They are active military personnel who have chosen to dedicate their careers to protecting others and preserving important traditions. Their stillness represents not just discipline, but a deep commitment to service that goes beyond themselves. As Rebecca spoke, she noticed that the guards seemed to stand even taller, their pride in their service evident despite their required expressionless faces. The visitors hung on every word, their respect for the guards growing with each detail they learned about the dedication required for such a role. Mr. Chen, Don, supported by his daughter, slowly raised his hand in a subtle salute toward James. The gesture was shaky due to his stroke-related limitations, but the intent was unmistakably respectful. Lisa felt her throat tighten with emotion as she realized this was the first time since her father's stroke that he had felt compelled to honor someone else's service. The morning was transforming into something none of them had expected: a meeting of hearts and minds across the boundaries of protocol, disability, and social convention. The breaking point came when Tommy, emboldened by James's earlier kindness with the toy soldier, made a decision that would shatter protocol entirely. The 10-year-old had been studying James's uniform with intense concentration, comparing every detail to his beloved toy soldier. Finally, his curiosity overcame his shyness. "Excuse me, Mr. Guard," Tommy said politely, stepping closer to James's position. "Is your hat very heavy? My toy soldier has a hat like yours, but mine is just plastic." The question hung in the air like a challenge to everything James had been trained to do. According to regulations, he should continue staring straight ahead, giving no acknowledgement whatsoever to the question. But as James looked down through his peripheral vision at Tommy's upturned face, so full of genuine curiosity and respect, he felt something fundamental shift inside him. Jennifer immediately moved to pull Tommy back, her face flushed with embarrassment. "Tommy, sweetheart, remember what we talked about? The guards can't talk while they're working?" But Tommy persisted, his voice growing more excited. "But Mummy, I just want to know about his hat. I've been practicing standing straight like him, and I want to know if the hat makes it harder." James felt his resolve crumbling. Here was a child who had been practicing military posture at home, who carried a toy soldier everywhere, who looked at the guards not as tourist attractions, but as heroes worthy of emulation. The boy's question wasn't disrespectful, it was the inquiry of someone who genuinely wanted to understand and perhaps follow in their footsteps someday. Corporal Davies, observing from his nearby position, found himself in a similar state of internal conflict. He could see the distress on Jennifer's face as she tried to manage Tommy's enthusiasm while being respectful of guard protocols. Davies had a younger sister with special needs, and he recognized the delicate balance parents had to maintain between allowing their children to engage with the world and protecting them from rejection or disappointment. The decision happened almost instantaneously, as if some invisible signal passed between the guards. James slowly turned his head down toward Tommy, breaking the most fundamental rule of his position. The movement was deliberate and unmistakably conscious choice to prioritize human connection over rigid protocol. "Yes, little soldier," James said quietly. His voice warmed despite years of training to remain silent. "The hat is quite heavy, about 1.5 pounds, but we trained for years to make it look easy." Tommy's gasp of delight echoed across the courtyard, drawing the attention of everyone in the vicinity. The boy's face lit up with such pure joy that several of the adults in the group immediately began tearing up. Jennifer covered her mouth, with her hands overwhelmed by the kindness of this stranger who had chosen to break his own rules to make her son happy. "Really? 1.5 pounds?" Tommy asked, his excitement bubbling over. "That's like carrying 3 apples on your head. You must be super strong." James found himself smiling, another breach of protocol, but one that felt completely natural. "We do a lot of neck exercises," he admitted, showing Tommy's mathematical approach to understanding the challenge. The interaction was observed by Captain Harrison, who had chosen that moment to conduct his routine inspection of the guard positions. From a distance, he could see that something unusual was happening, but he was too far away to intervene immediately. His first instinct was concern about discipline and the potential consequences of guards abandoning their posts. However, as Captain Harrison approached and began to understand the situation, his perspective started to shift. He could see that this wasn't a case of guards being unprofessional or succumbing to tourist pressure. Instead, he was witnessing an act of genuine compassion toward visitors who clearly held deep respect for military service. Meanwhile, Emma Rodriguez was facing her own moment of decision. Sarah had been watching Wellington with such longing that it was almost painful to observe. The teenager clearly wanted to get closer to the horse, but was hesitant to ask, probably accustomed to being told that accommodations for her wheelchair would be too difficult or inconvenient. Wellington, sensing Sarah's presence and emotions, began to display behavior that Emma had rarely seen from him. The horse started turning his head toward Sarah, his ears pricked forward with interest. It was as if Wellington was as curious about Sarah as she was about him. Emma made her choice. Breaking from her position beside Wellington, she approached Sarah's wheelchair. "Would you like to meet Wellington properly?" she asked, her voice gentle but clear. Sarah's eyes widened with disbelief. "Could I really? I don't want to cause any trouble or break any rules." "Sometimes," Emma said, guiding Wellington closer to Sarah's wheelchair, "the most important rule is treating people with kindness." As Wellington approached, Sarah reached out tentatively. The massive horse lowered his head, allowing her to touch his velvet nose. The contact was electric. Sarah had dreamed of this moment for years, and Wellington seemed to understand the significance of the interaction. "He's so gentle," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I can't believe this is really happening." Claire watched in amazement as Sarah, who often struggled with self-confidence due to her physical limitations, transformed before her eyes. The teenager sat straighter in her wheelchair. Her voice became stronger, and her smile was radiant. It was as if meeting Wellington had awakened something powerful within her. Back at the main entrance, other members of the group had begun to notice the guard's unprecedented behavior. Marcus approached Corporal Davies with his tablet full of historical questions, and Davies found himself genuinely interested in the young man's extensive knowledge. They began an impromptu discussion about the evolution of ceremonial uniforms, with Davies sharing insider details that weren't included in any of Marcus's history books. David, using his communication tablet, had prepared a message thanking the guards for their service. When he showed the message to the nearest guard, the soldier read it carefully and nodded with genuine appreciation. "Thank you," the guard mouthed silently, moved by the thoughtful gesture. Emma had noticed Maria still, holding her container of homemade cookies and looking uncertain about how to offer them. Emma approached her with a warm smile. "Do you make those yourself?" she asked. Maria's face brightened. "Yes, I made them for everyone. I know you're working hard, and I thought you might be hungry." Emma accepted a cookie gratefully, and Maria's joy at being able to contribute to the day was evident to everyone around her. What had started as a routine tourist visit was rapidly evolving into something unprecedented in the history of Windsor Castle tours. The afternoon sun climbed higher, as what had begun as a simple protocol breach evolved into something extraordinary that would be remembered for generations. Captain Harrison, having made the decision to allow the interactions to continue, found himself coordinating an impromptu celebration that honored both military tradition and human dignity in ways no textbook had ever taught him. Tommy, now wearing James's bearskin hat with pride despite its enormous size, had become the unofficial mascot of the gathering. James had begun teaching him basic military commands. Tommy was executing them with the serious concentration that only a child completely absorbed in their dreams could manage. "Attention," James would call out, and Tommy would snap to his version of perfect posture, his small frame dwarfed by the ceremonial hat, but his determination unmistakable. Left face. James commanded, and Tommy would turn with careful precision, occasionally wobbling slightly, but never losing his focus. The other guards had gathered around to watch, and they found themselves genuinely impressed by the boy's dedication and natural ability to follow instructions. Jennifer watched her son with tears streaming down her face. Tommy had always struggled with coordination and fine motor skills due to his Down syndrome, but here he was performing military drills with a precision that amazed everyone present. The guards weren't patronizing him or simplifying their instructions. They were treating him as a legitimate recruit worthy of proper training. "He's got real potential," Corporal Davies whispered to James. "Look at how quickly he's picking up the movements. His focus is incredible." James nodded, equally impressed. "Tommy, you're doing excellent work. I think you might be ready for advanced training. Would you like to learn how to present arms?" Tommy's eyes grew impossibly wide with excitement. "Present arms? Like in the movies? With the rifle?" James carefully demonstrated the movement with his ceremonial rifle, explaining each step slowly and clearly. Tommy watched with intense concentration, memorizing every detail. When James offered to let him hold the rifle unloaded and under careful supervision, Tommy's reverence was evident. He handled the weapon with utmost respect, understanding instinctively that this was a privilege beyond measure. Meanwhile, Stier's experience with Wellington had evolved into something magical. Emma Rodriguez had discovered that Sarah possessed an intuitive understanding of horses that was remarkable for someone who had never ridden before. Wellington responded to Sarah's gentle guidance as if they had been partners for years. "Would you like to try directing him around the courtyard?" Emma asked. "Wellington knows all the ceremonial movements, could experience what it's like to ride in an actual royal procession." Sarah could barely speak through her emotion. "Could I really? I've watched the ceremonies on television my whole life, but I never imagined I could be part of one." Emma began teaching Sarah the subtle commands used during state occasions. Wellington responded beautifully to Sarah's directions, executing turns and stops with the precision that had made him famous in royal ceremonies. Other guards formed an honor guard around them, creating an authentic ceremonial atmosphere that transported Sarah into her deepest dreams. Miss Claire watched in amazement as Sarah transformed before her eyes. The teenager, who often felt self-conscious about her disability, now commanded the attention and respect of elite soldiers while mounted on a horse that had served in ceremonies for the royal family. Entire being, Marcus had become the center of an impromptu historical society, with guards sharing stories and asking questions about regimental histories that Marcus somehow knew better than they did. His encyclopedic knowledge was being appreciated not as an oddity, but as genuine expertise that enhanced everyone's understanding of their shared traditions. "The ceremony we're performing right now," Marcus explained to the assembled guards, "has its roots in practices dating back to the 17th century. The specific movements Tommy is learning were codified during the reign of King George III. The guards listened with genuine interest, many of them learning details about their own roles that they had never encountered in formal training. Marcus's passion for military history was infectious, and several guards admitted they wanted to study their regiment's background more thoroughly after this conversation. David had filled his communication tablet with responses from guards about their daily experiences, their training, and their motivations for choosing ceremonial service. The guards were answering with remarkable honesty and depth, sharing insights about the mental discipline required for their role and the personal satisfaction they derived from upholding such high standards. One guard explained through David's tablet how the stillness of their duty allowed for deep reflection and meditation. Another shared how the ceremonial role had helped him develop patience and mental fortitude that benefited every aspect of his life. David was documenting perspectives on military service that were rarely captured or shared with the public. Mr. Chen, inspired by the activities around him, began attempting to demonstrate some of the military exercises he remembered from his youth. Despite his physical limitations from the stroke, his muscle memory retained fragments of his training from decades earlier. The guards watched with respect and offered gentle encouragement as he tried to show them techniques he had learned as a young soldier. Lisa was overcome with emotion watching her father's engagement. Since his stroke, Mr. Chen had withdrawn from most social activities and rarely showed interest in anything beyond his basic daily needs. But here, surrounded by active soldiers and military traditions, he was reconnecting with a part of himself that had been dormant for years. Maria had established herself as the group's unofficial morale officer, ensuring everyone stayed hydrated and comfortable while distributing her endless supply of homemade cookies. She had also begun sharing stories about each member of their group with the guards, helping them understand the unique challenges and strengths each person brought to their community. Tommy practices marching every day, Maria told James. Sets up his toy soldiers and marches with them around his room. His mother says he's been doing it for 3 years, ever since he first saw guards on television. James felt deeply moved by this revelation. Tommy's dedication to emulating the guards wasn't just childhood play, was genuine admiration and aspiration. The boy had been training in his own way for years to be worthy of this moment. Emma, the photographer, was capturing not just images but documenting testimonials from everyone involved. The guards were eager to share their thoughts about the experience, and the visitors were articulating how profoundly meaningful this interaction had become for them. "This is what service really looks like," one guard told Emma's camera. "We spend so much time focusing on ceremony and protocol that we sometimes forget we're here to serve people. Today reminded me what that actually means." Captain Harrison had made another unprecedented decision. He contacted the castle's senior administrators to report what was happening, not as a disciplinary issue, but as a remarkable demonstration of military values in action. Rather than face consequences, he wanted to ensure that this story was properly documented and potentially used as a training example for future guards. The response from the royal household was swift and surprising. Word reached the senior staff that the royal family themselves had heard about the interaction and expressed their approval and admiration for the guards' compassion and judgment. Rather than viewing it as a breach of protocol, they saw it as the guards embodying the very spirit of service that the monarchy represented. As the extended visit began to wind down, none of the participants wanted the experience to end. Reluctantly returned James's bearskin hat, but not before James had arranged for official photos to be taken of Tommy wearing it. "Every good soldier needs proper documentation of their training," James explained seriously, treating Tommy's participation with the same respect he would show any military colleague. Sarah's dismount from Wellington was emotional for everyone involved. The horse seemed reluctant to see her go, nuzzling her hand as Emma helped her back into her wheelchair. "Will I ever see him again?" Sarah asked, her voice thick with emotion. Emma knelt beside Sarah's wheelchair. "Wellington and I are here most days. If you ever want to visit again, just let the castle know you're coming. I'm sure Wellington would love to see his new friend." The promise meant everything to Sarah, for the first time in her life. She had found a place where her disability didn't define her limitations, but where her qualities as a person were recognized and celebrated. Marcus had exchanged contact information with several guards who wanted to continue their historical discussions. They had discovered a shared passion that transcended their different roles and backgrounds. And several guards expressed interest in visiting the Sunshine Special Needs Center to continue their conversations about military history. As the group prepared to leave, Captain Harrison made one final gesture that would cement this day in everyone's memory. He arranged for the guards to form an official honor guard for the visitors' departure, treating them with the same ceremony usually reserved for dignitaries and royal family members. The guards lined up in perfect formation as the group walked between them toward their waiting bus. Each guard saluted as the visitors passed, acknowledging not just their visit, but their worth as individuals deserving of honor and respect. Tommy attempted to return each salute with military precision, his small hand trembling with the effort to get it exactly right. Sarah waved from her wheelchair while wiping tears from her eyes. Marcus nodded solemnly to each guard, understanding the significance of the ceremony being performed in their honor. As the bus pulled away from Windsor Castle, both groups' visitors and guards were forever changed by their encounter. The guards had learned that true military excellence meant knowing when to break rules in service of higher principles. Visitors had experienced a level of inclusion and respect that would influence how they saw themselves and their place in the world for the rest of their lives. But the story was far from over. The ripple effects of this extraordinary morning were just beginning to spread, touching lives and changing perspectives in ways none of them could have imagined. 6 months after that transformative October morning, the impact of the guards' compassionate breach of protocol had rippled far beyond the stone walls of Windsor Castle. The story, initially shared quietly among castle staff and the families involved, had grown into something much larger, a symbol of what inclusion and human dignity could look like when people chose compassion over rigid adherence to rules. Tommy's transformation was perhaps the most visible to those who knew him. The boy who had once struggled with confidence and coordination was now the star of his special needs sports program. His experience with the guards had given him a sense of purpose and belonging that influenced every aspect of his life. Jennifer watched in amazement as her son, who had previously been hesitant to try new activities, now approached challenges with the determination of a soldier in training. Tommy's teacher says his focus and discipline have improved dramatically. Jennifer explained to Mrs. Thompson during one of their regular check-ins. He practices his guard stance every morning before school, and it seems to help him feel confident about tackling difficult tasks throughout the day. Tommy had also become something of a celebrity at Sunshine Special Needs Center. He regularly shared his story with new clients, using his experience to encourage others to pursue their dreams regardless of obstacles. His toy soldier had been joined by an official photograph of him wearing James's bearskin hat, both displayed proudly in his bedroom as daily reminders that he was capable of extraordinary things. The boy had also begun corresponding with James through letters facilitated by the castle staff. These exchanges had become highlights of both Tommy's and James's weeks. Tommy would share his progress in various activities and ask detailed questions about military life, while James responded with encouragement and additional insights about the discipline and dedication required for service. Sarah's life had taken an even more dramatic turn. Her experience with Wellington had awakened a passion that would define her future. With her family's support and assistance from local disability advocacy groups, Sarah had begun regular riding lessons at a therapeutic riding center. Her natural ability with horses, first recognized by Emma Rodriguez, had developed into genuine skill and expertise. Sarah's confidence has transformed completely, Miss Claire reported to the center's staff. She's gone from being withdrawn and hesitant to becoming a leader among her peers. The other clients look up to her now, and she's begun mentoring younger riders at the stable. The therapeutic riding program had also led to Sarah's involvement in competitive disabled sports. She was training for regional equestrian competitions, with dreams of potentially representing her country in Paralympic events. Her bedroom walls were now covered with ribbons from local competitions and photographs of her with various horses. But the picture of her with Wellington remained in the place of honor above her bed. Emma Rodriguez had become Sarah's unofficial mentor, visiting the therapeutic riding center whenever her duties allowed. The bond formed during that magical morning at Windsor Castle had evolved into a meaningful friendship that enriched both of their lives. Emma often said that teaching Sarah had reminded her why she loved working with horses and had rekindled her own passion for her role in the ceremonial guard. Marcus's experience had opened doors he never could have imagined. His extensive knowledge of military history, finally appreciated by people who understood its value, had led to several remarkable opportunities. The guards he had met at Windsor Castle had recommended him to the Imperial War Museum, where he now worked part-time as a research assistant specializing in ceremonial military traditions. Marcus has found his calling, his mother told Mrs. Thompson with tears in her eyes. For years, we worried that his intense focus on military history was limiting his social development. But now we see it was preparing him for exactly this kind of work. He's respected for his expertise and valued as a colleague. Marcus's position at the museum had also allowed him to develop friendships with military historians and active service members who appreciated his unique perspective and encyclopedic knowledge. He had begun writing articles for military history publications, and his insights were being sought by researchers working on projects related to ceremonial traditions. David's documentation of the Windsor Castle experience had evolved into a comprehensive project about accessibility and inclusion. In public spaces, using his communication tablet and with support from center staff, David had created presentations that were being used by tourism organizations and government agencies to improve their services for disabled visitors. David's work is being recognized. At the national level, Mrs. Thompson explained to the board of directors, his perspective as someone who experiences these barriers firsthand has provided insights that accessibility experts with traditional backgrounds might miss. David had also been invited to speak at conferences about disability rights in tourism. Accessibility. His presentations delivered through his communication technology were powerful testimonials about the difference that genuine inclusion could make in people's lives. Mr. Chen's improvement since the castle visit had been remarkable. From a medical standpoint, his engagement with the guards and the emotional impact of the experience had seemed to reawaken cognitive and emotional functions that had been dormant since his stroke. His speech had improved, his mobility was stronger, and most importantly, his depression had lifted significantly. Dad talks about that day constantly, Lisa told anyone who would listen. It was like watching him remember who he used to be. The guards treated him with such respect and patience, listening to his stories even when his words were hard to understand. It gave him back his sense of dignity. Mr. Chen had begun attending veteran support groups and had reconnected with old military friends he had lost touch with after his stroke. The confidence boost from his interaction with the active duty guards reminded him that his service and experiences still had value and meaning. Emma, the photographer, had compiled her images and stories from that day into a traveling exhibition about breaking down barriers between people with disabilities and the broader community. The exhibition had toured community centers, schools, and government buildings, inspiring similar acts of inclusion and understanding in various settings. These photographs capture something that words alone couldn't convey, Emma explained to visitors viewing her exhibition. They show that when we move beyond seeing disabilities as limitations and instead focus on people's humanity and potential, beautiful things happen. Maria's role in the day had been quieter, but no less significant. Her natural caretaking abilities and her homemade cookies had created an atmosphere of warmth and hospitality that had helped everyone feel comfortable. Following the castle visit, Maria had begun volunteering with local military family support groups. Using her nurturing skills to help families dealing with deployment stress and other military-related challenges, the guards themselves had been profoundly changed by the experience. James had been promoted to senior sergeant, partly in recognition of his demonstration of leadership and judgment during the incident. But more importantly, he had discovered that breaking protocol in service of human dignity had actually made him a better soldier, not a less disciplined one. Captain Harrison had presented the entire incident as a case study in adaptive leadership to his superiors. Rather than facing discipline, the guards involved had received commendations for exemplifying the highest values of military service. The incident had sparked conversations throughout the British military about the balance between protocol and humanity, leading to revised guidelines that gave guards more discretion in special circumstances. Emma Rodriguez had been selected to help develop new training programs for ceremonial guards that emphasized the public service aspects of their role alongside traditional military discipline. Her experience with Wellington and Sarah had demonstrated that guards could maintain their dignity and effectiveness while also connecting meaningfully with the people they served. The story had also reached international attention through social media and news coverage. Videos and photographs from that morning had been shared millions of times, inspiring similar acts of kindness and inclusion at tourist attractions and public institutions around the world. The hashtag Guards of Compassion had become associated with stories of public servants going above and beyond to make people feel valued and included. But perhaps most importantly, the relationships formed. That day had continued to grow and flourish. The guards and visitors had maintained contact, creating an extended family bound not by blood or circumstance, but by a shared moment of perfect understanding and mutual respect. As Mrs. Thompson reflected on the long-term impact of that October morning, she realized that it had accomplished more for disability awareness and inclusion than years of formal advocacy work. It had shown the world that people with disabilities didn't need accommodation or pity. They needed recognition of their full humanity and the opportunity to connect with others on equal terms. The story of the guards who broke protocol to celebrate special needs guests had become more than just a heartwarming anecdote. It had become proof that the most important rules were often the unwritten ones about treating every person with dignity, respect, and love.